Hi, my name is Vesa Juvonen and I work as a principal consultant in Microsoft Corporation. In this module, we'll concentrate on a different service architecture and extensibility options. In overall service architecture, the overall service architecture has dramatically changed the topology possibilities for implementing SharePoint 2010. We also have the ability to implement our own service applications. For example, we could create different types of services which could be consumed from our custom web parts and from other customizations as well. We'll begin this module with a detailed look on the changes to the service model architecture. Next, we'll cover the key changes from an administrative point of view. However, if we are interested in developing of the custom service applications, we'll first need to understand the existing service applications, so we'll also take a look at them in this module. In the final section, we'll focus on the steps that are needed to actually create a custom service application in SharePoint 2010. In this section, we'll concentrate on the changes in the service model comparing to 2007 version with the updates and options available within 2010 version. We'll also cover the out-of-the-box service applications and the different types of services that are available. In 2007, there were challenges concerning providing different services between web applications. The Shared Service Provider, or SSP, in 2007 was a big improvement over the 2003 architecture. However, it was also an all-or-nothing configuration option. When you associated your web applications to a single shared service provider, you basically associated all services at once. This meant that if it was not possible to share individual shared services between web applications. This meant that if you had two web applications and wanted to share the shared service between them, but wanted to have a separate user profile settings for each of them, it was not possible. Due to this lack of service granularity in SharePoint 2007, we would sometimes need to compromise on an ideal design in some cases. There was also no way to provide additional shared services for the web applications using the same infrastructure. A small number of the services in the Shared Service Provider could be used cross-farm, but it was tricky and the implementation process for each service was not consistent. The new service model is much more flexible and provides us many new possibilities when designing our farm topology. Basically, the biggest change is the fact that we can provide the services to web applications using an a la carte selection model, meaning that we can pick and choose which services we want to consume for each SharePoint web application. Services are grouped together in a service proxy groups, and each farm contains a default service proxy group, which is usually used for majority of web applications. However, we also have the ability to create custom proxy groups for each web application, which will also allow us to select only the service applications we want to consume on the per web application basis. Even though there is no out-of-the-box services deployed as part of the SharePoint Foundation, the framework to host service applications is available. This means that you can install third-party service applications or custom-built service applications to SharePoint Foundation farm. You don't necessarily need to have the SharePoint Server 2010, which though provides many of the out-of-the-box services which can be used. Individual service applications can be tied to a single farm or shared across multiple farms. The capability depends on the service application and how it's actually implemented. By sharing service applications across farm, we have the option to create dedicated farms used only for hosting services. Additionally, by sharing service applications between farms, we can create centralized locations to manage our services. Service application can be easily scaled out for load balancing high-demand service applications. You can select which services in your farm are used to run, which servers in your farm are used to run certain services. This is an example design which demonstrates the service application new capabilities. In this diagram, we have two web applications, HTTP Legal and HTTP HR Web. In this case, both of these web applications need to have their own dedicated search and Excel services configurations, but we would also like to share the same user profiles between them. This was not possible in SharePoint 2007. However, since we now have more flexible options in 2010, we can certainly share only the user profiles between the web applications. In this case, the design would mean that there's actually 5 service applications running. One for user profile and 2 service applications for Excel and search services for each of the web applications. As mentioned earlier, the SharePoint farms can share certain services between the different farms. In this example, we have shared managed metadata service between public and internal farms. We've also implemented dedicated user profile and service instances for each individual farm, which are configured to each particular environment. Search is also configured for each farm, which provides a content security boundary. The services farm in this case is used exclusively to host the shared services. That being said, Farm A and Farm B could also use individual services from within their own farms as well. This slide lists some of the out-of-the-box service applications. The list actually continues on the following slide as well. It's important to notice that these service applications will not be available in every installation, which means that there are different services available depending upon the licensed versions, for instance between standard and enterprise versions. Let's go through the service applications one by one. Access Services allows viewing, editing and interacting with Access databases in browser. You can create Access web databases using client-side access and then publish them to be used in browser. Application Register Service provides backward compatibility for business data connections used in 2007 environments. Business Data Connectivity Service provides SharePoint Farm within the ability to upload BCS models that describe the interfaces of your enterprise's line of business systems and thereby access the data within these systems. Excel Services allows viewing and interactivity with Excel files in browser. Lotus Notes Connector is a search connector to crawl the data within Lotus Notes server. Managed Metadata Service provides access to managed taxonomy hierarchies, keywords and social tagging infrastructure, as well as content type publishing across site collections. Performance Point Service application provides monitoring and analytic capabilities of Performance Point services such as storage and publication of dashboards and related content. PowerPoint Service application enables the viewing, editing and broadcast of PowerPoint presentations in a web browser. There's quite a few service applications available out of the box. Let's continue the list in this slide. We have the Search Service application, which is used to index content and serve search queries. There's Secure Store Service, which provides capabilities to store data, for example, credentials set securely, and associates it to specific identity or group of identities. State Service provides temporary storage of user session data for Office SharePoint Server components. Usage and health data collections is used to collect farm-wide usage and health data and provides the ability to view various usage and health reports. User Profile Service application adds supports for My Sites, profile pages, social tagging, and other social computing features. Visiographic Service enables viewing and refreshing of Visio web diagrams. Web Analytics Service application enables write insights into web usage patterns by processing and analyzing web analytics data. Word Automation Services provides a framework for performing automated document conversions, for example, to PDF format. The Word Viewing Service is used to prepare Word documents for viewing within browser. As you see, there's definitely a lot of new services and capabilities available, which we can utilize in our deployments, also within our customizations. Many of the out-of-the-box applications will have their own databases in SQL. This means that when we are designing our farm topology, we'll need to take the databases in count for each of these service applications. In addition to this, custom service applications can have their own databases as well, which would be created when a new instances of a service application is created. Now let's move into discussing the architecture of the service model in more detail. This slide includes an example SharePoint farm, which consists from a SQL Server backend, tier, and 4 application servers. What kind of components do we actually have? The service on each application server includes the actual program or binaries which are deployed and enabled on different application servers in the farm. These can be custom services deployed as part of the project customizations or some third-party services which are installed. This is not just an assembly or WCF service. It could be actually much more. The custom service could consist from a custom timer job services, WCF services, application pages, and so on. The service machine instance is the actual instance running on the application server. We can design which of the servers will host our service instances and which will not. When we create these service instances or start the services on servers, the instance will be added automatically to internal load balancer, which will keep track of the service load distribution to the farm, to the servers. This is an internal software load balancer which is implemented in a simple round-robin model. So, for instance, using our example on this slide, service calls would be routed first to server 1, then server 3, and then server 4, and so on one-by-one basis. If you need, you can implement your own load balancing model as well. The actual service application is a logical concept of the service. It includes the actual configuration and management of each particular service application, like the database connection string and specific service application settings. Service application proxy is an interface which is used by service consumers and for communicating with the farm or with the service itself. This is not a web service or WCF proxy. It's a proxy to access the service application services. The proxy knows how to talk to the load balancer so that we know which server to contact and how to consume the actual services. Proxies enable the service to communicate between the farms as well. So if we have configured the service application to be running on a farm A, we can configure proxy in a farm B to consume the service on farm A. Then we have the consumers, which are the component utilizing the service application. It can be a web part, ASPX page, or other service application, WCF service, or, for example, PowerShell commandlet. Consumer has a reference to the service application proxy to be able to consume the services provided. Good example is, for example, the profile controls in my site. The profile controls in the user interface does not know where the actual profile information is, but it can connect to a proxy and then request the information from associated services. Let's have a look on the new service application administration user interface. We'll cover the different options available for service application configuration and how the service application can be managed.
In this demonstration, we'll concentrate on the service application management and what has actually changed from the administrative point of view. Since if we start writing our own custom service application, we obviously need to understand the key concepts as well. Since we don't have the shared service provider in the SharePoint 2010 anymore, there's a different way of configuring the individual service applications. And we can access the service applications from the application management. So for example, from the left menu application management, we can see the different service applications available by clicking the service applications link. And in here we are able to see the currently running service applications within the particular farm. And if we start looking at the different functionalities available, we are able to create new instances of individual service applications. So depending on your service application, quite often the service applications can have multiple instances running, and these can be configured differently for individual web applications. And this way you can have multiple different configurations available of the same service application. The following option is the connect, which basically means that we are able to connect to existing service applications which are running in some another farm. So if we would, for example, want to connect to manage metadata service which is running in a separate farm, the only thing which we need to do is to define the HTTP address of the particular service in another SharePoint farm. And after that, our proxy would start consuming that particular service application from that farm. The following thing which we can do is to manage the service applications. Well, we can obviously delete, but let's have a look on the user profile management, for example. So the user profile service application, when that's selected, we're able to manage the individual settings and configurations which are dependent on this particular service application. And it's a good practice, as mentioned in the slides as well, that if you write your own custom service applications, you would follow up the same guidance. So you would first have this kind of a dashboard for service application and the different settings, and then you are providing the individual configuration options and management options behind this dashboard, which is kind of an introduction page for particular service application configurations. Let's move back to the service application list and continue going through the different functionalities available. So when we have selected a single service application, we can define who are the administrators for this particular application. And if there's multiple different permissions available, we're able to associate those permissions to individual users. So in this case, for example, for the user profile service application, the application pool account has retrieved people for search crawlers access, but it doesn't have any additional access rights for this particular service application. So we're able to identify and manage these permissions based on the service application itself. The individual permissions which are available are defined from the service application point of view, and individual service application will also check these permissions during the execution. Let's click cancel and move on the settings. The following setting is the properties, and the properties is the setting where we can actually see the initial configurations and change the initial configurations of the individual service applications. Since the user profile service is actually running a WCF service and there's additional services running, as part of the provisioning of this particular service application, the information concerning the application pool and the database information is also asked. And these profile settings are dependent on the service application itself. So if the service application has multiple databases, like in this case, we're asking all of those databases pages from the properties or as part of the service application creation. And there's also additional configurations available, which can be configured if required. Good example of the difference property page is the Manage Metadata service. So in here, the properties are a little bit different and the configurations are a little bit different, which are available for the functionality. For example, the content type hub functionality can be configured from the properties of a service application. The following functionality, or which is available from the ribbon, is the publish functionality, which basically means that to be able to connect to a service application on a separate form, we need to first publish service application to be available. And from here we can see we can configure the different settings, the connection type, and do we actually trust additional settings of this publish or the actual publishing of the service application. And from here we can also see the published URL of the service application, which is required when we are connecting from the NATO farm to this particular service application. The description and information URL are something which are visible when the connection is done between the farms. How do this service application then actually relate to web applications? Let's move back to the application management side, and from here we can see there's functionality available to configure service application associations. And we currently have 3 different applications available within this particular form. And there's the Internet, there's the upgraded Contoso Internet, and Internet as applications. The Internet application is using the default proxy, which is basically having most of the service applications available. But the upgraded and Internet applications have been using these custom proxy groups, which are groups of service applications. So, for example, if we want to change which of the service applications are associated to this upgraded Contoso Internet application, we are able to select or deselect any of the service applications available. Good example in this case is, for example, that there's 2 different managed metadata services available. And one of the services might be for the internal users, and one of the services might be for external users. So we want to associate the different managed metadata service for a particular web application. So when do we actually associate these? Those can be associated afterwards, but also when we are creating new web applications, we are able to associate what kind of services will be available, or are we using the default proxy group, which will have the most of the settings available. So if we scroll down on the dialog, which is visible when we are creating new web applications, there's the service application connection setting. So we're able to use the default setting, or we are also able to select a custom proxy group, which basically gives us possibility to select only those service applications which are meaningful for this particular web application which will be created. Let's cancel this and move back to the front page, and I think we went through the different settings. Obviously, different functionality and configurations can be also automated using PowerShell or object model if required.
In this section, we'll concentrate on the steps that are involved in creating custom service applications. The service applications are a great way to encapsulate exposed services using standardized platform. For example, an ISV could choose to write a custom add-in to SharePoint, which could be implemented and managed using a standard SharePoint user interface and administration features. As mentioned in a previous slide, we now have an ability to create our own custom search services if required, or custom service applications. This is a relatively advanced topic, and as such you'll need to be prepared for bridging a learning curve. The service application model makes it possible to provide richer integration between third-party systems and SharePoint. For example, you could write your own custom HR service application which could provide rich interactive interaction or integration to third-party systems compared to the BCS-based integration. This also provides us an additional abstraction layer which can be individually created, managed and tested. Service applications allow sharing information easily between multiple site collections located even in multiple web applications, as long as the web applications are associated to a same proxy group. There's a lot of advantages for providing our services using the service application framework. Within our custom service application development, we can utilize a lot of the out-of-the-box functionalities which are available. We can store the service application settings securely in configuration database. This means, for example, value pairs which define the configuration of the service. There's web service and database provisioning infrastructure which we can utilize to provision our components efficiently. As long as we implement certain base classes, for example, the optional database classes, which we might have as part of our service application, the database itself is provisioned whenever a service application is created. We have also this nice service discovery, which means that first of all, the user interface is capable of showing all the available services within the farm. But you can also provide what is also provided is the topology service, which is also a service application. Topology service is a backbone of a service application framework. It knows how to expose the services to other farms and how to wire up the actual services themselves. There's the round-robin load balancer, which is available also by default. Service applications can also fully leverage the claims-based authentication, which is now part of the SharePoint 2010. And we can also opt in to existing SharePoint backup and restore. The only thing you need to do or implement is view interfaces and decorate your classes in a certain way. If you implement view callbacks, backup and restore process will call out your code as part of the process, and you can provide any information to be backed up by the particular process. So basically you can create, for example, in-memory XML of your customizations and provide it to the backup process. And when we need to restore the service, you get the same information back so that you can get and configure your service like it was before the restoring. In the management side, there's two different management stories. There's functionalities which you can utilize from the existing framework to provide consistent user interface to manage your service. Obviously, you have to design the configuration page based on your specific service configuration options, but you can easily get the UI. To be published to a standard service application administration pages. For the PowerShell side, there's obviously out-of-the-box commandlets to generally manage the services in farm. But you'll also need to implement actual service-specific commandlets so that your service can be configured using scripts. Like we covered in a separate module, there's ready-to-use base classes for SharePoint commandlets as well, which will make the development of these more straightforward. So when do we actually want to write these services? And when does it actually make sense to make a service application? We want our service application to provide additional value over the out-of-the-box capabilities, since otherwise it wouldn't make any sense to write the code in the first place. You might want to do this if you, for example, have specialized computation or analytics which wouldn't make sense to create on fly in web part. Rather do the required actions in a separate process and expose the outcome using service application. One reason could be that you want to share information across site collections or web applications. Search or user profile services are really good examples of this. If you need to run long-running operations, it's better to run code using, for example, timed jobs and then just expose the information to consumers. Good example of this is the crawling within the search. Or when you need to have a robust scale-out strategy, meaning that since we can utilize the scale-out capabilities out of the box, we can easily provide additional hardware and power for our service if required. As mentioned in an introduction, creating a custom search service application requires several steps and is a complex task. So deciding upon whether or not to implement a custom service should be considered carefully. You shouldn't write custom applications, service applications to share information or features specific to a single site collection or a single site. This just wouldn't be worth of the time and investment to be done. Let's have an example case where service application implementation could be feasible. There's two different heavily utilized line of business systems which are containing information to be shown in SharePoint user interface. Custom service application, including custom database, has been created to aggregate information from the CRM and order line of business systems. Required information is aggregated and cached to service application database using a custom timer job which will access the line of business systems and update the local custom service application databases. Collecting information is further analyzed on the service application database for presentation purposes by a custom timer job again. Consumers of the custom service applications uses service application proxies to access the information collected to a custom service application database and show the combined information from two systems in a meaningful way for end users. Advantages compared to the direct access to these external systems from web parts are the fact that the information is collected and modified to a proper format before it's presented. So we don't have to have a direct access to line of business systems if required. Consumers can contact already prepared information and they don't have to additionally manipulate it during the rendering time. Service application utilizes the core infrastructure features like the load balancing and backup and restore supports, which will be provided out of the box for the custom service application. What about the overall life cycle of the service? First, we'll need to build and implement the custom service itself. These slides concentrate on the life cycle after that. Registration of the service is a similar concept as for the features within the solution packages, which we need to deploy to the file system. You can deploy the front-end stuff only to web front-end servers and back-end functionalities on application servers. Of course not, then we will need to tell which services are available for the SharePoint itself. Provisioning means that the process of creating new service application instance. This is the same thing as you are creating a new out-of-the-box when you are creating new out-of-the-box service application. If you start the creation of application, all required information is requested so that we can actually provision service application properly. We also need to create a proxy itself. Depending on the service, there might be also databases provisioned. Then we'll start the actual services so that somebody can actually so that there's someone actually handle the requests coming in. And as a final step, there's the managing activities which are dependent on the service application. You can, for example, further configure the service or change its behavior when required. So what are we actually implementing? There's a lot of stuff to be done, which obviously depends also on the service functionalities to be provided. In the bottom of the picture, we have the SQL Server databases. Search or manage metadata service are a good example of service applications which have their own information stored to a specific databases created as during the creation of service application instance or service application. Service application may or may not have databases which are created as part of the provisioning. There's a fairly straightforward base classes and interfaces to automate this. You basically only have to tell the location of a SQL script and the framework will take the code and execute the script against SQL Server. We have the service logic which will have the actual code which is executed as part of the service execution. Here, that's the location of the actual business logic for the service application. To make your service exposed from application server to web front ends, we'll need to implement WCF service. This is the endpoint of the service and it exposes the contract of the service. Contract defines the functionalities exposed and the different interfaces provided. Service application proxy is installed on each web front-end servers of the farm. Proxy is responsible of calling the WCF interface on the application server. It works kind of like a gateway to, access different services. And as a final step, we need to write the actual consumers of the service. These can be anything, web parts, commandlets, custom ASPX pages, or even other WCF services. It actually doesn't matter. The consumer is some component which wants to consume the functionalities provided by the service application. What about the administration story? As a developer, we'll need to implement at least the logic for the service provisioning and for PowerShell management. Technically, your stuff won't break if you don't have one or another, but it's a good practice to implement both so that your service application can be easily managed. With the user interface implementation, you should also follow up the same guidance as for the out-of-the-box services do. As in the first management page, it's more or less this means that the first management page is more or less kind of a dashboard which only shows the different functionalities available. Good examples are the additional functionalities for user profiles. There's numerous different pages and configuration options for the user profile service application exposed from the user profile management. As we discussed in the previous slide, we should have at least two different options for administration of our service, which are the central administration user interface and PowerShell. What you might also want to do is expose some of the administration interfaces through the service application proxy, so that you can more easily manage the service application even remotely. Good example of this is the Manage Metadata service. You can go to the Manage Metadata terms from the central administration or from the site collection level administration tools, which connects the actual Manage Metadata service using a proxy. Of course, since your service application is exposed using WCF, you could definitely write application which accesses the service application directly using the WCF interface. This is not, however, recommended, since the proxy is the component responsible of the round-robin load balancing, and you don't want to be responsible of solving the correct server by yourself. Let's continue with the installation. All of the service application components don't have to be located in all of the servers. Service application components can be only in the application servers and the proxies in the web front-end servers. Service application components must be deployed to SharePoint application servers. Proxies and consumers must be deployed to web front-end servers. For installation, there are a few different options to choose from. You can deploy your service application using custom MSIs, solution packages, or even PowerShell commandlets. Or actually, commandlets cannot be used for, commandlets can be used for registration, but not for deployment itself. If you use solution packages, you could, for example, write a farm scope feature which automatically installs the functionality as part of the solution deployment to a farm. Since farm scope features are activated by default when the solution package is deployed, your service application would be automatically registered. Let's summarize the tasks to be done when you start developing custom service applications. First of all, we'll need to create the service application itself. Following step is to create the interface to expose the service application. This is the WCF service, which is the application endpoint. Then we'll need to implement the installers, which are responsible of registration of the service to SharePoint. As mentioned in a previous slide, this could be a feature or commandlet. We also need to implement the installers for the proxies so that the consumers can easily access the service which they want to access. For installation and deployment, we'll need to install and provision the service application to application servers and the application proxies to web front-end servers. Obviously, the service application is there for a reason, so we need to deploy the actual consumers and test the whole solution out. If developers are interested in developing custom services, there's few concepts to concentrate to. You'll need to be familiar with WCF, since we exposed our services using WCF service. We also need to implement the PowerShell commandlets, so you need to be familiar of that one as well. You also need to be quite familiar of the SharePoint administration APIs. Let's have a look on the simple custom service and how it's been developed. We'll cover the different objects to be created and how to interact with the service application framework.
In this demonstration, we'll concentrate on the steps to write a custom service application, what kind of objects we need to override and what kind of elements we need to do, and what are the steps we need to follow to get the service application to be available. And of course, how can we use the service application within the consumers. Let's move to Visual Studio side and have a look on the structures themselves. The first thing which we want to do is to define what's the purpose of our custom service application and what's the interface available. In this case, the interface is relatively simple. It only contains a add method which is calculating two different values together, but it demonstrates the structure of the service application relatively well. And when we walk through the different structures, we can also see that there's quite a few things which we need to do to make a service application available. Even though there's a lot of out-of-the-box base classes available, we should always consider that do we actually want to write a custom service application or not. So the first thing which we need to do is to define the actual business contract, or the contract which exposes the different operations available. Then the key object is the service application itself. And the service application is done by implementing or inheriting this SPIIS web service application. And obviously in this case, since we are providing the service functionalities, also our interface. The service application itself or the object is responsible of creating and provisioning the service application when the assemblies are available within the SharePoint farm. So in this case, we are, for example, creating the custom service application. We are adding the necessary service endpoints and necessary code to expose our service application within the forms. We are also, there's configurations available to create, for example, the database itself and so on. In here we are also responsible of the actual provisioning process. So if, for example, we do have a database available, we need to remember to provision the database itself. The database provisioning is relatively simple if we jump there and come back in a second. Since if we are writing the SP database or inheriting our custom database object from the SP database, we're able to utilize the out-of-the-box functionalities relatively well. In this case, we are deploying as part of our customizations the custom SQL script, which is responsible of creating the actual database. And we can use the SP database provision base object or base functionality to actually write or create this database for us based on the database connection string. Let's move back to the service application itself and move forward within the structures. What else are we saying here is, for example, what are the manage link and the properties link? Basically meaning that which ASPX pages are exposing the manage functionality and the properties functionality for this particular service application. And those ASPX pages are also as part of our solution, SharePoint solution, which is deployed to the farm. Let's have a look on those, how those are actually associated in a while. What else we have here is we are able to do custom permissions and access rights. So we're able to have custom administrative rights, in this case the modify, and we're able to have, for example, the application rights which are available within the permissions functionality. So we're able to say which persons are able to use the add and which persons would be able to use the subtract functionality if we would expose those. And if we actually have a look on the key other functionalities, we obviously have the WCF service, which is exposed and deployed to the proper place so that the service application can be consumed. And the object which is consuming that is actually the custom service client or the custom service proxy. But within our consumers, we can add a reference or instance to create an instance to the service client and start consuming the different services available. In this case, we were exposing the add functionality, so the custom service client is actually having interfaces for the add functionality as well. The service client is connecting to the proxy, and the proxy is inherited from the SPIIS Web Service Proxy base class. And this proxy implementation is responsible of solving out the actual farm or actual server to contact. But since we are actually inheriting from the base classes, we don't have to implement the network load balancer and so on in here by ourselves. So actually, all of this, all of the necessary plumbing are done based on the base classes. When the service application has been implemented and is ready, we're able to deploy that as a solution package if it's packaged correctly. In this case, the service application has been already deployed to the farm. Let's have a look on the central administration side. How does it actually look? So if we go to the application management and manage service applications, we're able to see our custom service application available in the new functionality. So we're able to create new instances of the same custom service application if required. And in this case, we have already created a custom service application, which we can then further manage or configure the properties. And since we were providing those paths to these properties and manage pages from the base classes, we're able to provide these custom property pages which are exposing those different settings which are available, or configurations which we can configure for this particular service application. In this case, it's a relatively simple service application, so there's no properties to manage. But in a similar way, we can do the same for the manage page of the custom service. So we can start exposing different configurations, statistics, or whatever is required for a particular service application. Now that the service application is available, we are able to consume the service application within the farm. And in this case, let's move a little bit a while back on the Visual Studio side. We have also created the necessary PowerShell script to install the service application and to create these service application instances to be existed. The new custom service application and the new application proxy can be also created from the central administration UI if required. For testing purposes, we're able to, in this case, we've implemented this invoke custom service PowerShell, so we're able to test this basic functionality directly from the PowerShell itself. Basically meaning that we're able to run a custom service PS1. Let's have a look on the PowerShell script. So we're able to run this invoke command from the PowerShell script itself by providing the site URL and the operations and the two numbers to be calculated against each other. So this is for initial testing of the service application to make sure that it actually works before we start using it in web parts and so on. So executing the test custom service PS1 PowerShell, we'll start testing the functionality, and in this case it's providing or calculating 1 plus 1, and we can see that the end result is correct and the service application is working properly. But what if we start using the service application within our web parts, and what do we need to do then? We've already implemented a custom web part which is consuming the service application services. The first thing we need to do is add a reference, obviously, to the actual assembly which is implementing the proxy to access the service application services. And when that reference has been done, we're able to create instance of the proxy. And let's have a look on the code. In this case, we are using the add functionality as well, but we're able to create instance of that proxy and create instance of the client so that we are able to consume the services which are available. Since the reference is there, we're able to create custom service client object, and we're using the SP service context current so that we are associating the proper SP service context. In this case, the client was providing the add functionality. So if we have a look on the client client methods, there's the add, which is the actual service we are exposing. And since the reference has been set and the web part is deployed, we are able to actually execute the two numbers together and start consuming the services which are exposed. So from the user interface side, when the user custom service application is available, the proxy is available for communicational purposes, so we're able to access from this particular web frontend to the custom service. We can then start using the service within our web parts as well. So let's add that custom web part to the page and have a look on the basic functionality. So adding a web part from the Ignite category, custom service consumer web part, and let's save the changes. As we saw from the code walkthrough, this is relatively simple service application, so we're able to calculate two numbers together, And basically what happens when we click calculate, we are accessing the service application proxy, or the client which is accessing the proxy, which is then requesting the web frontend proper server to contact from the topology service that's connected. Topology service gets or gives the information back to the proxy. Proxy connects to the server and actually executes the actual functionality of the service application, which is within, for example, within the application server. And when we start calculating the functionality or calculating or consuming the service is executing properly. And using the similar steps, in this case the whole custom service and the proxy are within the same server, but obviously you can expose the service application also from a separate, even in a separate form, in a similar way that we can expose out-of-the-box services throughout multiple forms, or most of the out-of-the-box services.
That sums up the module. We first covered the changes from 2007 to 2010 concerning the service application model and the service model components. We also took a look on the out-of-the-box service application and how they can be configured within the form. As a final topic, we covered the steps to develop custom service applications in high level. Thanks for your time, and hopefully this was useful.